So tonight we're gonna do something a little bit different. I think there are ways for me to like show a video within Zoom, but based on all our experiences with Zoom this year, I don't really trust Zoom to show a video. So what we're gonna actually do is I'm gonna put some links in the chat here in a few minutes, and we're gonna actually take a few minutes to go and listen to a piece of music, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it, and then we'll talk some more, and then we'll go over to the piece of music and come back. So just so you know, it's gonna be a little in and out in that sense. Let me see here. Get back to screen sharing. All right. All right, let's get everybody muted. All right. Thank you guys so much for being here. It is a real joy. I'm going to flip through here. How many people, raise your hand if you knew who Arvo was before you saw this class? Raise your hand or like put up a little, thumbs up or something like that. And I'm going to flip through. What percentage are we at? Oh, we're batting maybe 50% here. Maybe not 50%. Okay, a little under 50%. That's totally fine. How do you guys think we should say his name? How do you guys think we should say his name?
Pärt.
Yeah, we need. I need an Estonian dialect coach.
Yeah.
Is what we need for this. But my best guess. Oh, we have chats coming in hot and heavy. All right, we have chats coming in hot and heavy. Okay, feel free to use the chat as we go throughout tonight. But yes, my best guess is the longer A. Although if you go into Google, it will try to tell you it's part, but I think it just doesn't understand the double dots over the A is the real problem there. But just to give a little bit of background on why we're doing this tonight, some confessions. This is truly an amateur project for me. Now, I kind of give that disclaimer at other times, but I really mean it in this context. I have studied music since probably 4th grade. Both my parents were musicians. They actually met in the band at Vanderbilt University. They both played French horn. So I started playing piano about 3rd, 4th grade and kind of continued since that time. I've done some writing of my own music, but playing a lot of classical stuff. But studied music theory, but never in depth in a college sense. So a lot of this is picked up along the way. But the reason I love the word amateur is because it has the roots of amour, of love in there. So even though there's not an expertise in this, there is a love for this. This is something kind of a passion project and something that really gripped my heart along the way in my own journey, and that God has really opened up the gospel to me in fresh ways. So so many of you will know more about this than me. Probably know more about Arvo. I'll probably use his first name a lot just so we can avoid the last name. But he feels personal to me now, actually, in some ways too. He's a sweet old man at this point. So I appreciate him. I was introduced to Arvo by IACer John Stein. Many of you may know, or some of you may know John Stein. He actually worked with Eugene Peterson in depth on The Message, and is just the best I can say is a prophetic mystic in our midst. I just deeply appreciate John. And one of the first times I went over to his house, he turned on his CD player and said, "Hey, let's listen to this." And he played me Spiegel im Spiegel on his big speaker set in his living room, blasted like up to 11. And it was just an absolute blast sitting with this older dear saint, listening to this composer I'd never heard of, this song, which was unique in anything I had heard. And I kind of appreciated it, but didn't really, get it at the time. But John was trying to tell me something in that. And what he was trying to tell me has unfurled over the last few years. I've really picked up and returned to this topic and this composer this year. I think mostly because I am so hungry for beauty. I don't know if anybody else is in that spot. I bet many of us are. But I have just been starving for beautiful things. I've spent more time outside. I've spent more time listening to music, anything I can get my hands on that is beautiful. or that evokes that longing for the transcendent in me, even outside of the normal context that I work in of words, has just been has just really struck me this year in particular. So I've been thankful to return to this music and return to this gift and dive into it a little bit more. This idea of beauty, I think, is actually pretty key to the way God made the world and to who God is in himself. I've actually come to see beauty not as a luxury, but as a necessity. Philosophically, right? There's this idea of truth, goodness, and beauty, all three together. That is key to what it really means to know what is real, to know what is the good life. Truth and goodness we're kind of accustomed to in the biblical story, right? We talk about truth and goodness all the time, but beauty gets sometimes a little bit shorter shrift. But starting all the way back in Genesis, God declares the world he has made good. That doesn't necessarily mean morally good only in the context, right? There's like no morality yet when he's saying these things. There's a sense of fullness that actually our word beauty probably gets a little bit closer to. The trees that God puts in the Garden of Eden, it says, are useful for fruit, but they're also pleasing to the eye. They are beautiful, kind of in this extravagant giftedness. You go throughout the Old Testament, the Ark of the Covenant and the temple and the tabernacle are made to be beautiful. They're made to point back to the Garden of Eden. And of course, when you get to the end of all things, the images in Revelation 21 and 22, they're designed to evoke images of beauty. In all kinds of different ways. We could go down a long rabbit trail there, but I'll leave it there for now. All that to say is that beauty, God is beautiful in himself. There is a fullness that evokes our wonder and our awe and our longings in God himself. And all throughout his creation, he has placed these breadcrumbs of beauty as an icon, as a sign drawing us back to him. One of those is sound. One of those is music. Music is its own language of beauty, along with others. One of the questions, though, I've had for a while is, can music or other art forms speak the gospel in themselves, right? Can beauty proclaim the gospel in itself? Or does it automatically or does it need necessarily Christian vocal content or tagged on to it? How do we think about Christian music in that sense? And is it okay to be moved by music that is not explicitly filled with Christian lyrics, et cetera, et cetera? There are all kinds of questions in this realm of aesthetics there. But some of these questions mirror Arvo Pärt's journey of discovery in his own life of composing. So sort of using his life is what I'm hoping to do as a lens for this question of beauty. And does God speak good news even in the midst of beauty, even if it doesn't have words sometimes? So let's talk about Arvo Pärt. Oh, it looks like my slide messed up there. I apologize. I'll fix that before I send it out to you guys. Arvo Pärt, Estonian composer, born, I think, in the 1930s, I believe. That's what I was starting to type there, and apparently I got left off. Raised Lutheran in Estonia. Who knows where Estonia is? Who can give me a sense of like where Estonia is, just in the world in general? Put it in chat if you want to. Who's got their world geography down? Anybody?
It's taking me too long to get to chat. It's Eastern Europe, Lithuania, Latvia, that part of the world.
Yeah, so go to Eastern Europe, right? And then go northeast as far as you can until you get to Russia. And that's pretty much where we're at. So it's kind of cold. And it's very Slavic in that sense. But typically, historically, Lutheran. Now, Arvo Pärt is a devout Orthodox Christian, and we'll tell a little bit of that story in the midst of this. He is the most performed living composer in the world, or perhaps second, as I understand it, to John Williams, the guy who writes all the movie scores. So every time they have a Pops concert, like John Williams like kicks up a little bit. But Arvo Pärt is right up there. His works have had a resonance that is just tremendous, and that many often describe as profoundly spiritual, even if they're not believers. His work has been marketed in this way, but is also experienced as profoundly spiritual by many, many people. He's kind of put into this area of holy minimalism, and we'll talk about that later. But that gives you a sense of where his works are kind of headed. But they have an amazing reach. You have heard his music almost assuredly if you watched any movies, but may not know it yet. Okay, just to give a sense of Pärt's early career. Pärt's earliest music experience came on his family piano, like many of ours does. But in his family piano, the middle keys were all not working. He only had the bottom register and the top register. And so he would play around in the bottom and top registers when he was a young kid. That will actually kind of become important later in his music. But in his early career, he was a sound producer, a sound engineer, really bred in him a love of sound in and of itself, and the ways different instruments produce different timbres, different types of sounds, and the quality of sounds. He also did a lot of movie score work, so there was a sense of story in his music, a sense of meaning underneath, trying to tell a story through music, which we'll hear more of a little bit later. Became sort of a famous composer within Estonia. I don't really know like the context of Estonia and what that means to be a famous composer in Estonia, but he was rising to some Estonian fame, but started having a tense relationship with the Soviet authorities. You got to think this is post-World War II. We're headed into the Cold War here. And so the Soviets are exercising control over Estonia. And that means controlling not over what we think of, politically, but also controlling all of the arts, also controlling all of concerts and what music can be played and can't, and et cetera, et cetera. That tension really culminates, this tension that he's feeling with the Soviet authorities, in the work Credo. Credo. What does the word credo sound like? It's Latin, but it's very similar to something at IC we do every Sunday morning. All right? Creed. That's right. This is Arvo Pärt's Creed. He comes out with this piece in 1968, and it's sort of his most ambitious piece to date. And it is a turning point in his life. Now, I've debated how to introduce this piece of music to us, right? I could kind of explain it on the front end, then we can listen to it. I think what would be better is to give as little context as possible, and to just have you listen to it. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna put I'm gonna stop share for a second. I'm gonna put the link to this in chat, and I'm gonna have us all go listen to it. It's about 12, 13 minutes long, okay? So we'll just leave our screens muted, all right? You'll click on the link. It'll take you to YouTube. You'll listen to it. I had two options with this piece for you to listen to. Either I could get really good sound quality, but you wouldn't have subtitles to know what they're saying, or I could give you less good sound quality and I could give you subtitles. And different people will disagree with this decision, I'm sure, but I decided to go with a slightly less good sound quality and the subtitles because I really think it'll help our discussion of what's happening here. So I will post another version of it that I think is a great musical quality for you to go back and listen to later. But this is a video of a performance. There is some creative camera work that is included, which I very much appreciate, and I think really lends the sense to it. But think under Soviet oppression, right? Popular composer in Estonia. Think about what some of what he's saying might mean in that context. All right, everybody click on the link, get out of here, go listen to it, have fun. I can't wait for you to come back. Okay, there was a lot going on in there, wasn't there? At what minute point did you think, what have I gotten myself into? Right? I mean, it's chaos. The subtitles are really helpful. Pärt became enamored with the words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount as one of the most distinctive things about Christianity. You have heard it said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But I say, love your enemies. Right? That's the verse that undergirds everything, with a front and a back end of Credo Jesu Christe. I believe in Jesus Christ, like shouted at the top of their lungs on the front and the back end. Okay. So that's kind of what's like obvious on the surface. What did you notice about the sections that were chaotic? What kinds of things were they saying? What kinds of things were they singing in the sections that were chaotic?
It was all the I, and a lot of times an individual word, I, tooth, or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep. Yep. This whole thing is peaceful, and it's really riffing off that Bach prelude, right? It's really riffing off in the beginning. And then they start to introduce the other sounds, the other noises, the other cacophony, small at first, when the words for the law, right, come in. Until, did you notice the point where the piano comes back in underneath everything and starts playing that melody again, starts playing that tune again? And that's when the cacophony's still there, but it starts to settle down, right? It starts to calm down. It still blasts in at times when you want it to just shut up, right? There are moments where you're listening where you're like, please stop making that noise. I want to listen to the piano. That's kind of the point. And at that point, the gospel part of it, love your enemies, comes into the piece. Okay, so that's the overall musical structure, but there are other musical things going on here underneath the surface that'll be important. Other observations of the piece or things you felt in the midst of it.
In that really dissonant portion, it was so interesting to watch how percussive it was and how that seemed to I don't know, I just kept on thinking of like retribution and mistrust.
Absolutely. Tons of percussive work with the timpani and other things going on there, but also just even the way the brass instruments were playing. It was like, how can we play as obnoxiously and percussively as possible? Yeah.
This isn't the music, it was the recording, but it was fun to see everybody upside down in the middle of all the chaos.
Yeah. The camera work is quite creative. Like, I mean, some would say in a distracting way, but I kind of like the way it makes the world, like it mirrors what he's trying to say in the music. Like this goes to chaos that starts to feel upside down, right? I kind of appreciate that about that part of it. So let's go back here. Let's go back to our slides. Hold on a second. All right, we've talked about what we heard. Whoop, a little bit. Let's go back. Okay. This was the culmination. Let me make sure I didn't skip one here. Yep. This piece, 1968. Think about everything that's happened in the world in 1968, right? Things are nuts here in America. They're also nuts in other parts of the world. And this is Arvo Pärt's real breaking point in two different ways. Musically, he is caught in a dead end, really, creatively. On the one side, you have Russian oppression and expectations. They expected Soviet music to sound Soviet, to use Soviet melodies, to use Soviet harmonies, kind of a folk music type focus. This is obviously not that. Also rejecting much of the Western heritage of music, right? Because that Western heritage doesn't fit with this new world order. This new world order that the Soviet regime, this atheist regime, is supposedly bringing. But so there were musical expectations along with that. They wanted their composers under Soviet influence to sound Soviet. Now, Pärt had been pushing back against that for a while, and he had been doing it using modernist musical techniques. So in this era, a type of composition called serialism was all the rage. Now, it doesn't have anything to do with breakfast or a really good podcast by NPR. Serialism was a type of composing that was different than what we normally think of as good sounding music, right? Most of our music is based on keys and scales. In a sequence of 13 notes on the piano, we pick out 8 of them in certain varieties. If they sound happy, we call them major scales. If they sound sad, we call them minor scales, right? And we talk about things being in major or minor keys, but we privilege usually those 8 notes within the 13 on the piano that are in an octave in a scale. What serialism did is it said, this is crass. It didn't actually mean this, but I'm trying to make it accessible. That's not fair. We need to use all the notes. So what serialism was trying to do was trying to fit every single one of those 13 notes into a piece of music, even when things clashed in a nasty way. All right. You think about everything that's happening in the world. There are lots of philosophical statements going on behind this. But this is what Pärt had been working in, these types of works that are trying to combine different sets of notes that don't necessarily sound pretty to us, but they're making a statement, various philosophical statements. Okay, so that was called serialism, and it was what the West, the anti-Russia, was working. So Soviets didn't like serialism at all because it represented a pushback against the Soviet folk music and all the music traditions there. So Pärt had been working on this for a while. In this particular piece, he also used the technique of collage. Now, collage sounds like what it is. You take one type of music and you throw it in with another type of music and you crash them together and you see what happens. So a piece doesn't necessarily have to have one melody line from beginning to end, how we might think of it. It's lots of things crashed in together. So what he's doing in Credo is he's using serialism in those nasty parts, right? When he's combining all those dissonant chords, that's not a cacophony of notes thrown together. That's actually very advanced musical theory, trying to get all 13 of the notes in to express a musical idea. And he's using collage. He's using this throwback to Bach, and he's combining it with these modernist techniques to make a new thing. Both of these are modernist musical expressions, which the Soviets would not have appreciated at all. Now, there's also a religious context to this, right? Soviets, atheistic, totalitarian, right? So starting your piece with "I believe in Jesus Christ" is like not really a winner in that context whatsoever. It's not something you do if you want to have another concert. Let's put it that way. But he is in the midst of religious awakening. He was a cradle Lutheran, but he was really waking up to spirituality and the gospel in some really profound ways. And he was headed actually towards Eastern Orthodoxy by this point. He doesn't convert until about 1972, but he's already thinking about these things. And that's just kind of typical of his awakening. This is a transitional season. So there's this musical context and some of those techniques he's using, collage and serialism, which are anti-Soviet. And he is using specific language about Jesus Christ in a way that would be anti-Soviet. So no surprise. Whoop, hold on just a second. No surprise He's blacklisted. This is the end of composing for Arvo Pärt in this season. But that's only one side of this piece. The other side is, notice what he paired with serialism. He paired the law with the serialistic parts of this piece. He paired the verse eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth with the nasty sounding combinations. And in the sections that refer back to the gospel, he uses the music from the Bach prelude. He just uses variations on that theme. He actually doesn't compose anything unique for that section. What Pärt is saying is he's at a dead end. He can't go the way of the Soviets in terms of his composition, because he's against everything they stand for. But his faith is awakening in such a way that he thinks the way of the West, right, the other side of the Cold War, in a sense, is also a dead end. And all the compositional fads and techniques are a dead end because he associates serialism, which is the main musical avant-garde perspective of the West in this season, with the law, which he is explicitly rejecting as our hope. And so what he's basically communicating is this piece is, I can't go east and I can't go west. And I don't have a way to say in my own voice what it is I'm trying to say. Because in order to communicate the gospel, I'm having to go backwards in history to this other form of music and kind of repurpose it, which is well and good. More to it than that. Greg, as some phenomenal musicians in on this call, serialism is very rule-based, brilliant to pair it with the law. It's a great point. A great point. So what he's saying is, I'm at a dead end, right? I'm done, which worked out pretty well because he was blacklisted in Estonia. He can't compose anymore, can't perform anymore. He's definitely on the naughty list. And so he goes into an 8-year compositional silence. Now, he does compose some things in this period, but for those of you at IAC, we talk sometimes about in your faith journey, you hit a wall. Well, in his musical journey, he has hit a wall. And for 8 years, from 68 to 76, he writes one kind of transitional symphony that doesn't get played or airtime anywhere in the midst of this time. But what he does is he actually goes back to the basics. He goes back to Gregorian chant, simple one-note chant modes. He actually goes through the Psalms and he writes tune to all the different
chants.
There we go. He writes tunes to all the different psalms. He actually has notebooks of them. I saw in a documentary where he pulls out his notebooks and he writes melodies, just single note melodies that correspond to the psalms. Hauntingly beautiful melodies sometimes. He studies polyphony, basically multiple melodies interacting together in the Renaissance era, kind of one step in complication above that. But fundamentally, he goes back to the basics, to the earliest roots of Western music, to the earliest roots of scales and even some forms of music before scales, like modes, that comes out of that. And after 8 years, he has what he calls the Big Bang. He has an awakening of sorts to a possibility of a way of composing that just using music can communicate the gospel in a new language, a new musical language. This comes out in one short little piece. It's like 3 minutes long, called Für Alina. And we're actually going to listen to that piece. And yes, it is by the same composer. I promise. It may not seem like it at first, but it is. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to mute ourselves. We're going to go listen to this piece of music. No crazy conductors to watch. I'm sorry. This one will be a little bit calmer. But this was the first piece he wrote coming off of that 8-year silence. And again, I just want to get at, what do you hear? What do you hear? So here it is. Go check it out, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, I think that's probably enough time for 2 listens for those who had them. Check the chat. We've started some conversation over on the chat. Yeah, what emotions did you feel in the midst of that? What was being roused up in you? For Allison, there's how did you put that, Allison? The little boy with the broken piano just stole my heart. There's an affection that's there. Cynthia said sad and lonely. Gary and Beth said alone but content, which is interesting. So there's a little bit of diversity in emotions rising up. What was rising up in you as that was playing? Tenderness, tears and heartbeat, longing for a companion note. I like that. I like that. Yep. Like quality, I thought, a sense of wandering. Oh man, you guys are hitting on it. You're hitting on it. Yeah, you're hearing it. You're hearing it. Yeah, definitely more stripped down, austere. Yeah. It's only 2 notes the entire time. Played at a time. As he's only hitting 2 notes at a time. Yep. Sad, like single raindrops in a puddle, like empty northern landscapes. Ooh, I like the northern. Yeah, I think of winter when I hear this song. Maybe that's where your northern is coming from. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. People tend to feel those things with Arvo Pärt's music. Now here's the irony of this big bang. Everything you just heard in Forlina, except for one single note, was written based on a rule, a very simple rule, and a very simple structure. Every note of the harmony was actually predetermined by the note in the melody, except for one. And we'll talk about that next week and why that is, okay? But what I want to just introduce you to and get you thinking about this week, hold on just a second. I gotta share my screen again. Yeah.
Could you repeat the rule?
Yeah, I'm not gonna tell you yet. I'm gonna tell you next week.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna tell you next week. I'm gonna keep you in suspense. Because this is just an example of a larger type of work, a musical language that he's creating. It's fresh. I mean, it's new in a sense, but also yet deeply rooted in ancient Gregorian chant and basic melody and harmony that's been true of the Western tradition for years. But he called this language Tentenabuli. I don't know if that's the way you pronounce it, but we're going to call it Tentenabuli, which translates to little bells. And it's not hard to see, right, why he would call it little bells. Right? It sounds like little bells being rung on every single one of those notes. Now, there are some specific rules and ways that he is processing through these 2 lines that you're hearing. And the way they interact is actually key for the gospel language that he is writing, and how that language can express different things in different pieces. So next week, I kind of want to unlock the key underneath of what he's getting at. But for this week, in between classes, I just want to encourage us all to listen and to just really have a listening party. There are sort of 5 main works that kind of burst forth in this burst of creativity after 1976. Furalina is the first, but Fratres, which means brothers, comes out in 1977. Cantus in Memoriam of Benjamin Britten comes out in 1977. Tabula Rasa, which means blank slate, comes out in 1977. And Spiegel im Spiegel, which is probably the most famous of all Pärt's works, comes out in 1978. There's this explosion. And what you're going to find is that they all sound different, but yet they are all written with very similar rules and structure and language. They're all based on the same kind of substrata, but they end up in very different places. So what I want us to do is to spend the week listening to these pieces, right? Just find them on Spotify, find them on YouTube, just spend some time soaking on them, turn up your speakers, and I'll see what is in common. That's what I want to challenge you with. What are you hearing that's similar? And what are you hearing that's different in these? And then next week, we'll peel back the elements of this language that he's creating, this structure that actually leads to these feelings of these senses of longing, these senses of affection, this sense of simplicity that creates this resonance in so many people's hearts. So that's your homework. I'll send this out. Some of you may have, already know these pieces and have listened to them. But again, listen for what sounds similar between all of them and what sounds different. Any questions or conversation at this point? Sorry to leave you on a cliffhanger, but I've got to get you to come back next week. So feel free to unmute yourself or use the chat. Anything else on Credo or Furalina? Or anything else of Pärt's story, which I may or may not know?
I didn't know much about him. I thought he was a choral composer, but there's a lot of, we've listened to 2 instrumental pieces, and it sounds, I tried to listen to some today, and they were all instrumental pieces.
Yeah. So later on, really, I think kicking in the 90s more significantly, he actually trends back towards choral pieces, but written in the same kind of language that he writes the instrumental pieces in. He has one basic structure, and he just uses it over and over and over in variations on a theme. But he starts incorporating in the 90s liturgical texts back in. And what's interesting about Pärt is, even though he's Eastern Orthodox, he was trained in the Western musical tradition and the Western church music tradition. So he actually uses a lot of Western texts that we are familiar with. So it makes him a little more accessible than somebody who is using more Eastern texts in that sense. So he's really bridging the East-West divide. But in this season, in the late 70s, it's all instrumental. And he's figuring out how to speak this language is really what he's doing. And then when he gets good at it, he can start bringing in the text again. Yeah. But yeah, now today, most of his new works are choral, and they're incredible. They're beautiful. If you another really good piece, if you want to listen to, that's choral in nature, is The Deer's Cry. That is just, man, yeah. It's just an incredibly beautiful piece of music. Again, written on the same basic premise of all of this in Tintinabuli. Other questions, comments? Ah, there it is. Yep. That's the version I'm thinking of, Elizabeth. Yeah. Oh, Julie asks, have you spent any time with composer John Tavener? Yes, The Lamb is an excellent piece by John Tavener. John Tavener is another of these examples of a holy minimalist, which is kind of in a similar vein. Henrik Gorecki, I don't know if I'm saying that right, probably not, is another composer. His Symphony of Sorrowful Songs is also sort of in this similar vein, and it is just unfathomably good. I listen to that every single Lent. Arvo is my Advent listen because of the longing he communicates. Gorecki is a Lenten listen, but they're all kind of in that same realm. But again, Arvo is specific in that he creates a specific language to go along with this, which is quite flexible, but also robust in the meaning it is trying to communicate. Aha, there you go. Feralina was for a friend's 18-year-old daughter upon the breakup of their family. Obviously, the title is an echo to Furley's, yes. He's also got a Für Anna, which is another piano piece that he did. Feel free to log off anytime you need to. Got done a little bit early tonight. Don't ever say that I never got done with a class early. It is possible. For those of you who are at IAC, you know it is rare, but it is possible. Yes, it is possible. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? What curiosities are you taking into the week of listening to these things?
Ken, thanks for doing this.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's fun. It's fun.
Yes.
Yeah, and believe me, we will get to like solid gospel content next week. We'll get into like incarnation and hypostatic union. Like it's here, trust me. So hang with me if you're like looking for more theology. So yeah, hang with me. All right. Well, have a great week. We'll go ahead and log off if nobody has any more comments. Last call.
Just to say thank you.
Oh, absolutely. This is fun. All right. Well, peace, friends. We'll see you next week. Same time. See you then.
Thanks, Ken. Bye-bye.